All right. I'm actually excited about this one. It is January 3rd. I don't think I've done anything this year yet. I've had talk to do. I've had Sunday school last week, and I have to do another thing this week, so it's been very, very busy. But I'm excited. And I wanted to do this one a little bit just off the cuff because it's interesting. You know, when we think of the stuff that has to happen in the last days, a lot of people are looking for signs of the times and things like that. And I don't so much go into timelines as much as I go into maybe some of the things that should be seen or you know, there's types and shadows. When you look at the scriptures, lots of things, they're not exactly the same each time, the way things play out, but they often echo. And a lot of the things from the last days have echoed some of the things that have caused downfall in the past. So I want to go over a few things that kind of showed what was the state of things when things were starting to kind of fall. One of them is from Alma, and another is from 3rd Nephi, right before the Savior came. And then I want to talk about Ephraim, because if you're a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, Ephraim has a major role. And a lot of people maybe don't recognize or maybe know all the things that were special about Ephraim, and also some of the negative tendencies, I guess you could say, of Ephraim. So, let's go. Alma 4, in chapter 4. This is about where iniquity, as you can see here, enters the church. Now, a lot of the things that we expect to happen is persecution, and we talk about all these terrible things that have to happen in the last days. You know, if you're following the general authorities, they do talk about persecution and they do talk about hard days, but they don't exactly speak with the same kind of they don't speak of the last days exactly the same as we would find in some of the other denominations of Christianity. A lot of what is found within the Book of Mormon, as well as the Bible, is that while there is persecution from outside of the church, much of the issues are from within. And I want to talk about that. And as we're talking about this, I want you to think about today. And maybe some of the things that you may have noticed within your wards, within the LDS community. I want you to think of those things. And as I go into this as well, I want to make sure to also say, you know, I'll get to that. So, just in the heading here, iniquity enters the church. So here I just highlighted, they began to establish the church more fully. They're baptizing all these people. Things seem to be going quite well. They're coming into this fruitful time. And because of this, as well as in the Bible, there's this thing where you go up and there's a time of prosperity and harvest. And then what happens at the peak? Always the same thing. And we'll go into some of that. Well, that's exactly what this video is. And it came to pass, this is in number 6. And it came to pass in the 8th year of the reign of Judges that the people of the church began to wax proud. Again, this isn't talking about what's happening outside of the church, though we know that there are things. This is specifically about the things within the church. And I have to wonder also, you know, the Book of Mormon, as it has been compiled by Mormon, he is speaking directly to our dispensation. These are things that he's wanting us to know. So I can't help but feel that a lot of these things are what we need to actually be focused on having eyes to see, or seeing what's going on and making sure that we don't fall under these same traps. And again, I want you to think about some of the things that are happening today. That the people of the church began to wax proud because of their exceeding riches. A lot of people in the church are doing quite well for themselves, and that's great. That's a part. Prosperity is great. And their fine silks and their fine twined linen, and because of their many flocks and herds and their gold and their silver and all manner of precious things, which they had obtained by their industry. It's well known that a lot of people in the church do go and get higher education and are often able to rise high within their careers. Very much, there's an entrepreneurial spirit that I think is present within the church, and people often do quite well for themselves. There's a lot of ways that we can get prosperity, but certainly monetarily, that seems to happen, and that's what was happening here. It was a time of great prosperity. And in all these things, they were lifted up in the pride of their eyes, for they began to wear very costly apparel. Does that remind you of anything in these days? Do you see people, and again, it's not to condemn people who wear costly apparel. I like wearing nice stuff. I know my girls want to be part of what's going on, what looks nice, and that's not what's being condemned. But there is kind of a thing to look for. Maybe kind of a byproduct of some of the things that are happening. They begin to wear this very costly apparel. And the teachers and priests and elders of the church, many of them were sorely grieved for the wickedness which they saw had begun to be among their people. And they saw, and this is going to be really interesting, I think, here. Me and my spouse were just talking about this the other day, so it was really interesting to run into this chapter, and then after running into this chapter, going and seeing, kind of mixing that to see how it meshes with 3rd Nephi. For they saw and began with great sorrow, for they saw and beheld with great sorrow that the people of the church, again, the people of the church began to be lifted up in the pride of their eyes, and to set their hearts upon riches and upon the vain things of the world. This is a warning for the church. Again, where much is given, much is expected. That they began to be scornful one towards another, and they began to persecute those that did not believe according to their own will and pleasure. The whole world, especially in the last few years, there's been a lot of tribalism, and we're all a part of it. This is human tendency. This isn't just tendency within the church, but this is natural man tendency. And though there's warning of all this happening, there's warning of how this can creep into the church, this natural man tendency. And then we can see just in hallways, as we were walking around, especially a few years ago, you could see everything was politics and putting people into groups. And if you're in this group, we can't like you because you're, people kind of had some strong opinions, and that's fine. But when it comes to being scornful of one another, and doesn't that seem like what's happening today, it can have a very negative effect. And then people within the church are persecuting each other. Again, there's the persecution from out, but the persecution from within is really what's being driven home here. And thus, in the 8th year of the reign of the judges, there began to be great contentions among the people of the church. Yea, there were envyings and strife and malice and persecutions and pride, even to exceed the pride of those who did not belong to the church. Isn't that sad? This was something that happened then. Does it sometimes seem like people within the church have pride that even exceeds those from without? Is there a sense of arrogance and entitlement? Something to think about. I'm not pointing any which way. I'm pointing my way too. We all have these tendencies. But have we seen that in the last little while? And thus ended the 8th year of the reign of judges, and the wickedness of the church was a great stumbling block to those who did not belong to the church. Because people are watching, when people are being even more nasty and taking part in this stuff, it doesn't help the case for the church when we engage in this tribalism that's so vicious. And thus the church began to fail in its progress. The example right here, the example of the church began to lead those who were unbelievers on from one piece of iniquity to another. And again, the unbelievers also can be part of the church. You know, people have testimonies of some sort when they're a part of the church, but not everyone's totally converted, and people go up and down in their faith. And when people are in a state where they're having a crisis of faith, or just kind of coasting and you know, coming to church, they're also watching. They're watching the example of the people within the church. And it can be a big stumbling block. And I think this is a warning for us today. And he saw great inequality among the people, some lifting themselves up with their pride, which also means arrogance, despising others, turning their backs upon the needy. Have we seen that? There's kind of a culture that, at least where I live right now, it's funny because, you know, the church is true, but we have fallible people, and we're all fallible in some way. But it's strange to see some of the things that we become so passionate about. And the naked, turning their backs upon the needy and the naked, and those who were hungry, and those who were athirst, and those who were sick and afflicted. Okay. Let's go to 3 Nephi 6. And this is some of the things that are going to happen right before the calamity and stuff. And again, think about today. The Nephites prosper, pride, wealth, and class distinctions arise. Do we have class distinctions? And again, this is not necessarily class based on money. There's classes in a million ways, based on politics, based on groups. Everything in our world right now is about classifying people within groups. And I also should say that while I'm saying this, I don't want it to come across that I'm pointing to one particular group, because when we do that, we also fall under the same issues. Not saying that there aren't things worth fighting for, and there aren't things worth speaking up about. Sorry, I got interrupted. I don't even remember what oh yeah. So when we're pointing towards that one side, we have to be careful in kind of our motivations for this. We do want to have motivations out of love, but it's tricky. It's tricky not to fall into these groups because social media perpetuates this. That's everything that's on the news. It's tricky to get away from it without actively pulling ourselves out of it. It's tricky. The church is rent with dissensions. Have we seen that? We see that in a multitude of ways. We have these dissensions as people, there's activism within the church trying to get the brethren to have the right revelations and things like that. It's within Sunday schools and things like that as well, all these different groups, and it's really leading a lot of people away. Satan leads the people in open rebellion. And they began again to prosper and to wax great, just like at the start of Alma 4 that we just saw. And the 20th and 6th and 7th years passed away, and there was great order in the land. And they had formed their laws according to equity and justice. Sounds great. And now there was nothing in the land to hinder the people from prospering continually, except they should fall into transgression. Again, they had continual peace for a long time. But it came to pass in the 29th year, there began to be some disputings among the people. And again, this is primarily, I believe, speaking about within the people in the church. And some were lifted up unto pride and boastings. And again, when I say that within the people of the church, happening everywhere, but it can also especially happen within the people of the church, even so that it rivals, it exceeds the pride of those who don't belong to the church. We often think people should, people are persecuting us. They'll get what's coming to them. We shouldn't think that. We're the chosen people. We're the holy people because we believe this. We still have our testimonies. We have to be careful about that sort of thing. We are fortunate. I'm fortunate to have been born within the covenant. And I don't know what I would have done if I would have been approached by missionaries in my 20s. I don't know if I would have been any different. I have no idea what my life would have been. Probably quite different. So we have to be careful. Lifted up unto pride and boastings because of their exceedingly great riches. Yea, unto great persecutions. The exact same thing with Alma's time. For there were many merchants in the land. I kind of think of summer salesmen, summer alarm system salesmen. But again, people prospering. And many lawyers in the church, and many officers. And the people began to be distinguished by ranks. Might not even be distinguished by ranks on pieces of paper, but within our minds and our hearts, we kind of see people as differently. And we can see even within our wards, we can kind of see certain types of people kind of naturally grouping up with each other. We see doctors, wives of doctors seem to like to kind of mingle together. Not saying there's anything wrong with that, but we see that people who have kids kind of seem to do that. We do that, and I can't help but think that also happens quite a bit when we see people kind of vocal about their political beliefs and things like that, and again, distinguished by ranks. These are some of the warnings that we have. And it sounds like exactly what has happened in the last few years, especially. Distinguished by ranks according to their riches and their chances for learning. Yea, some were ignorant because of their poverty, and others did receive great learning because of their riches. So, there are different ranks, and some people have been lucky enough to afford to receive great learning, and that's great. But it does also have this class distinction that can creep into people's hearts. Some were lifted up in pride, and others were exceedingly humble. Some did return railing for railing. I mean, everybody That is so a part of our natures. That's part of my nature. It is so hard online to not engage in things that we know will not be fruitful. We're not going to change anyone's mind. We do return railing for railing, not even online. We do that within our homes. We do that within our relationships with anyone. But man, there has been so much of that. While others would receive railing and persecution and all manner of afflictions and would not turn and revile again. That is hard. I have a difficult time sometimes getting my meek on, so to speak. But we're humble and penitent before God. And thus there became a great inequality in all the land, insomuch that the church began to be broken up. Yea, and that doesn't necessarily mean different denominations and things, but even within the church, different ideologies and things that don't necessarily have to do with the inspired doctrines and things that are coming from the living prophets. We see that a lot. Yea, insomuch in the 30th year the church was broken up. And I'm getting a phone call, sorry. All right, I had to go outside for a minute. My wife told me there was a fire truck behind our house, and we had to check what was going on. Okay, the church was broken up in all the land, save it were among a few of the Lamanites who converted unto the true faith, and they would not depart from it. For they were firm and steadfast and immovable, willing with all diligence to keep the commandments of the Lord. Now the cause of this iniquity of the people was this: Satan had great power. And this part's going to be interesting. Satan had great power unto the stirring up of the people to do all manner of iniquity. I sometimes think, I don't really care. I don't know if he cares if, a lot of people think Satan's on this one political side. I think he can stir up iniquity wherever we stand. And it doesn't necessarily always have to do with where we are. Obviously, I have my own personal opinions on some things that kind of push more of that stuff that we shouldn't, push some extra iniquity, I guess you could say. But, he can find us where we are. And to the puffing them up with pride, tempting them to seek for power and authority and riches and for the vain things of the world. Does that sound like today? And thus Satan did lead away the hearts of the people to do all manner of iniquity. They were carried about by the temptations of the devil. They were in a state of awful wickedness. And they did not sin ignorantly, for they knew the will of God concerning them. Therefore they did willfully rebel against God. And this is interesting because I wonder, even 10 years ago, the prophets were a little bit more blunt in general conference. You go back to see Ezra Taft Benson, OG Boyd K. Packer, Spencer W. Kimball, quite blunt. And, I don't know how much of that is the general authorities just kind of changing the tone to try to help us have less of that contention, which, I think we do need less of that, which is great. I think our hearts need to heal, and I think President Nelson has been I have loved his ministry. But I wonder how much of it, of their speech, has to do with, how much trouble the church would get if they spoke freely. They do not agree. The church does not agree with a lot of the stands that are culturally mainstream. And it has crept into BYU. It has crept into the hallways of our church. It's crept into Sunday schools, in young men's and young women's classes. And there are certain things where I think we have to be careful. In these times, prophets and people were being stoned and being destroyed and being killed and silenced. But I wonder how much silencing is kind of happening now. I think they are speaking freely, but I think they do have to be a little bit careful. And I wonder how much in the future, just before the Savior comes, I wonder how much silencing there would be. I know people want to silence the prophet and the apostles, and we might not know exactly how much of that would be happening, but people were exceedingly angry because of those who testified of these things, even within the church. And these are the things that are being warned about for us. Now there was no lawyer, nor judge, nor high priest that could have power to condemn anyone to death, save their condemnation was signed by the governor of the land. So people were trying to get rid of these holy men, these holy people, probably holy women as well, and get rid of them, silence them. But they couldn't do that without a signed letter or a signed condemnation by the governor. Now there were many of those who testified of the things pertaining to Christ, who testified boldly, who were taken and put to death secretly by the judges. These judges in high places, who, even though there are elected officials and things, these judges, these secret societies, these people who kind of do things their way. Again, we probably don't know how much of that happens, but it gets a little bit fishy sometimes. Now behold, this was contrary to the laws of the land, you think? Now it came to pass that those judges had many friends and kindreds, and did enter into a covenant one with another, kind of an understanding. And I don't know if this is necessarily exclusively out of the church at this point, but I'm not so sure. And they did combine against the people of the Lord. We know just in this last conference, I think in the Alberta, BC area kind of meeting that they did, and I'm not quite sure if it was then, it was kind of expressed that general conference, there was attacks on kind of digital attacks or something like that. I don't know all the details, but it might have not happened. And what if we weren't able to get general conference anymore? We would have to rely on the Spirit to be our guide. So when President Nelson implores us to be able to hear him and be guided by him, what if internet infrastructure went out and we had to rely on just our ward or again, just within our homes? We would have to rely on the guidance of the Spirit. And I wonder how true that may get in the last days, the very last days. And they did set a defiance the law and the rights of their country. So again, a lot of things are being pushed at this time, and at this time in 3rd Nephi, but also in the times we are in now. It's almost like people are wanting a reversal of what has been into a new thing, and everything has been labeled now. And I think we have to be aware of what's happening. And they did covenant one with another to destroy the governor, and establish a king over the land, that the land should no more be at liberty, and should be subject unto kings. Again, I don't necessarily believe we're going to ask for a king, but I think this also makes a lot of sense here that the land should no more be set at liberty. Especially, I think the United States has to be careful about this. There are lots of attacks on people's liberty for the sake of tolerance and things like that. Government is destroyed, people divide into tribes. The people were divided one against another, and they did separate one from another into tribes. We think of that as being separated into tribes within kind of the land, but that also kind of happens. That's happening within the church as well, and out of the church. Everything is tribalism. We all live in the same homes, and sometimes just within one home, there are these digital tribes that we're all a part of, even though we live within the same homes. And every tribe did appoint a chief or a leader over them, and then we follow those leaders. And they did yield themselves unto the power of Satan. They did cause a great contention in the land. The more righteous part of the people had nearly all become wicked. There were but few righteous men among them. They just did establish very strict laws that one tribe should not trespass against another. Very strict laws. Are there any people in the land that you just cannot trespass against? And I'm not saying that anyone should trespass against anyone, but there's these different, now you can't even say certain things without being destroyed, canceled, and all of those things. And it happens regardless of political standing, but again, I'll just leave that there. Their hearts were turned from the Lord, their God, ultimately. Again, I think Satan can find you where you stand. He can lift people up in pride, make people feel entitled and better than each other. And I don't think that is something that is just on one side. I don't think all the good people in the world are on one side. I think a lot of pride is all over. Now, I want to speak about Ephraim. Okay? And I have some notes that I want to just make sure I get those. But let's go into this, because Ephraim's an interesting kind of character. Ephraim has kind of an interesting role, certainly within the Old Testament, but also in the last days. And these are warnings. Often some of the warnings within the Old Testament were about the northern tribes of Israel. And the northern tribes often were also just called Ephraim, because Ephraim was a fruitful tribe and often intermingled within all these different places. So even though people were from all these different tribes, it would be almost like Ephraim would just take over, so to speak. I know Ephraim, and Israel is not hid from me. They have spirit of whoredoms is in the midst of them. The pride of Israel doth testify to his face. The pride of Ephraim is often something that is warned about. Often kind of this idea that there's this tendency that Ephraim has. And it kind of reminds me of this Alma 4 and Nephi 6 or 3 Nephi 6 and 7. But I want to go over some of these tendencies that Ephraim seems to have. And we know that it came where Assyria would eventually scatter them. Isaiah 28. Woe to the drunkards of Ephraim. Woe to the crown of pride, to the drunkards of Ephraim, whose glorious beauty is a fading flower. You know, Ephraim is so... I love learning about the different tribes as I go through the Old Testament. And Ephraim has this specific sort of way about them where they are valiant and they are wanting to be in the thick of things, great warriors. Joshua was one. Ephraim, or this great Ephraimite, who's this poster boy Ephraimite, took them across the Jordan and was a big part of leading the way, scattering or inheriting the promised land. But there were many times where they fell from grace. And a couple times within the Old Testament, with the Gideonites against the Midianites, or with Gideon against the Midianites, they didn't involve Ephraim. And Ephraim was ticked off that they didn't get to be a part of it. They like to be in the limelight. They like the glory. They like to be a part of things. And that's a good thing. That's a good thing to want to be a part of things, but they kind of get envious when someone else is getting the glory. They were envious of Judah because, Judah was another special tribe. They weren't envious of many people, but they were envious of Judah. Ephraim being fruitful, often quite intelligent, quite well off. Good to be a part of Ephraim. But they have this crown of pride that seems to be kind of like a tendency. The crown of pride, the drunkards of Ephraim shall be trodden under their feet. I love Ephraim and Manasseh. I love Manasseh in certain ways that are different than the reasons I love Ephraim. Did you know that Ephraim and Manasseh in Judaism, people still in some areas of Judaism, they blessed their sons to be or to kind of take on the character of Ephraim and Manasseh. And I think they're speaking about specifically the sons of Joseph, Ephraim and Manasseh. And I'm just interjecting after the fact, they would bless their children, their sons, not to be like Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, but specifically to take on kind of the character of Ephraim and Manasseh, the boys. And while the girls would be blessed to take on the character of these original spouses of the patriarchs, Rebecca and Sarah and whatnot. So isn't that interesting? Instead of the men taking on the character of these original patriarchs or Moses or any of these people, Ephraim and Manasseh are the ones that they look to. Manasseh being the oldest one, he might have thought that he had the greater blessing coming to him. But we know that it went to Ephraim. And while this happened, in Genesis, a lot of what's a part of Genesis is this clash between brothers. And when Ishmael didn't get the same blessing as Isaac, when Esau, being the eldest as well, didn't get the same blessing as Jacob, Cain being the elder one, all these older brothers in Genesis not quite getting the primary blessing, and it being given to the younger brother. This inheritance blessing, often in those days, or in the days of the patriarchs, the primary blessing from the father often meant, in these days when someone dies and there's the will, they would often spread it between everyone equally. But this primary blessing sometimes meant all the cattle, all the servants, all the possessions, basically the right to rule as the next kind of patriarch of that family. So a younger brother getting that blessing, inheritance, it would almost be like the older brothers have to suck up their pride and kind of live under the younger brothers sort of thing. I'm not saying that's what was happening here, but you can kind of see how that was a little bit, that might kind of inform how we sort of read that. And Manasseh was the first one that we would see that, and as well, the older brothers all being jealous of Joseph. But Manasseh didn't show a hint of being envious or jealous that his younger brother got the inheritance, greater blessing, I guess you could say. And Ephraim as well loved Manasseh. These were like the first two brothers who seemed to really be great within the story. And then Genesis ends. I love that. So, Ephraim was a gifted and valiant tribe. Yes, I got that. They like to be involved. Some of the traits of Ephraim, especially if you go, you could do a search of Ephraim on, there's all these different resources. You can do a search just of the term Ephraim, and you can see that while they are blessed and while they are applauded in lots of ways, the pride of Ephraim specifically and the tendency of Ephraim is called out. And as we look in our last times and the role that we feel Ephraim has to play, I think we have to maybe take note in some of the tendencies of Ephraim. When there was Saul, there was David, they were all united, all the tribes, and there was Solomon. But once Solomon was gone and Rehoboam was going to be the next one, and he was of Judah, Ephraim was the one that kind of stirred people up, stirred up the 10 tribes to establish their own kingdom apart from Judah. They were the ones that broke up essentially not just the political kingdom, but this was also like breaking up the spiritual kingdom. Ephraim. They don't have a great track record sometimes. And that first king from that northern unified tribes of Israel was an Ephraimite as well. So there's some self-centeredness that seems to creep in to the hearts of Ephraimites. Something to think about as we also look at how Ephraim was envious of Judah and the Jews. I can wonder what that might mean as we see all these different nations rising up against the Jews historically, and you can see that today. I wonder how much tendency of Ephraim would be pushing that along. So I think in our day, we feel like Ephraim's going to lead the way in a lot of ways. But we have to be careful because we know that Ephraim also has a tendency to kind of influence culture in a way that isn't always for good, though they're valiant. And when you want something done in the Old Testament, often a great Ephraimite would be there leading the way, and that's fantastic. But there are also some negative tendencies. I've already said that over and over and over. However, despite this, we have to also remember that the Savior uses imperfect tools to bring forth his work. And he loves us, and I know that we just have to be careful with how we view people, how we engage with people, how we kind of see what's happening with the natural man, and how that can creep into our own hearts within the church. I think we have to be careful that our pride doesn't exceed those that don't belong of the church. We want to be a light on the hill that people can look to. We want to be sort of like the leaven that people can be lifted up. We don't want the wickedness of the church to be a great stumbling block. And, the patience of the Lord has often been kind of shown again and again towards Ephraim, even though they keep pushing things away and they need kind of a slap on the head. Sometimes when they come back, they are welcomed back with open arms. And I speak about Ephraim, but because that's kind of the topic of this video in part, but I speak about just anyone and everyone. I know that we all have these same kinds of tendencies. We have some great, noble tendencies in us that we need to value and to let shine from us. But we also have some tendencies that start with some of the fruits of bad fruits, not fruits from the tree of life, so to speak. Fruits that are more self-centered and envious and prideful and jealous and all those negative things. So I just wanted to bring this forward. Does this sound like today to you? You are free to leave a comment if you like. I know I don't usually leave comments on videos. I'm quite private in that way, but please feel free to do that if you would like. If you don't like, I've also left a private email. I wouldn't give out your email to anyone, but if you wanted to let me know what you thought, or just drop me a line, or something that you would like me to look into, I'd be happy to do that, and I'll reach out to you as well if you do that. Please share this if you know of someone who could appreciate it, and don't share it as a way of pointing a finger at someone, a certain finger especially. And yeah, please make sure to like it if you can. If you've made it this far, it does help. And please consider subscribing if you haven't. And thank you.